So, Brad, can I start off the show today by telling you a story about Ensure, the nutritional drink?
I was hoping you would.
You're like, I've been waiting. This has been my long con to get a story about Ensure.
Yeah, this whole show is going to be about my age, isn't it?
So let me tell you a little bit about something about living in Los Angeles. So when we moved into our last house, because it had just been sold and the sellers had prepped it all with flowers and pretty new bushes and gotten the grass super green and all that sort of stuff, what happens, and I'm not joking about this, is scouts come around for commercials, and they literally ding-donged me at the door, and they're like, hi, we want to shoot a Honda commercial outside of your house, and maybe there'd be one scene inside. Would you like to do that? And I was like, I talked to my friend Fred, who works in production for ads a lot, and I said, do I want to do this? He goes, no, they'll destroy your house. Don't do it. Anyway, so long story short, people in LA occasionally get these people that come around and scout for commercials, right? Because they're shooting a lot of commercials for this or that. Okay, cut to my friend Tom Gamble, who is a writer on one of the senior writers on The Simpsons and a delightful human being. He's one of the most fun people you'll ever talk to. Tom is at his house one Saturday morning, and he's drinking his coffee, and he sees a commercial crew shooting outside of his house. And because Tom has been working in television for something like 35, 40 years, he knows his rights, and he walks outside and he goes, hey, first of all, he's got an incredible voice. He goes, hey, you can't be shooting outside my house. It's you're aiming right at my house there. You got to ask my permission. And the guy goes, no one here is involving your house. It's just in the background. It's no big deal. He goes, no, listen, I work in TV. I know how this works. You can't shoot my house unless you get my permission, and I don't give you permission. And they go, listen, buddy, we're almost wrapping up. No, we're not getting your permission. We're gonna finish shooting. So Tom, and I love this about him, he goes into his garage, he grabs an old bed sheet, and he grabs a can of paint, right? And on the outside of his rain gutters, he clips this gigantic sign on a bed sheet painted with hand paint that says, Ensure killed my pappy. And he hangs it. He hangs it from his house. And the whole crew is like, you son of a bitch. Ensure killed my pappy. I just thought that was amazing. Ensure killed my pappy. It's the use of the word pappy that just absolutely kills me. I love it. I love well, F it. This is how I'm going to handle this problem then. If you guys aren't going to handle it legally, then I'm not going to handle it. Cool.
He may be the only cartoonist to use the word pappy in a sentence since that guy that does Snuffy Smith.
I did not think we'd be talking about Snuffy Smith today, but here we go. Oh, Snuffy Smith. Talk about language that you never see in Americana anymore. Snuffy Smith, every third word is like, wait, what? I got to get out a dictionary for that one.
Yeah, you need a decoder ring to read a Snuffy Smith. And the thing that absolutely delights me about Snuffy Smith is that if you look at that comic, especially like on a Sunday, that the title of the comic is Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. But I'm desperate to know the reason. They have to put Barney Google really, really small letters and put Snuffy Smith up in big letters. And I don't think Barney Google has made an appearance in the comic for decades, yet he gets top billing, and I gotta find out why.
Well, okay, I agree with you because Barney Google, as you know, Brad, I know you know your comics history, Barney Google was the original progenitor of that strip, right? Like that was the head character of that strip. And then somewhere in the late 30s, early 40s, they rolled in Snuffy Smith. He got really popular. Then it became Barney Google and Snuffy Smith. And now it's basically just the Snuffy Smith show, right? Am I wrong about that?
You're absolutely, last time I checked in on it, yeah.
So I wonder if there's some sort of trademarking issue or sales issue where they can't change the name because Barney Google, like last seen in 1955 for a one-paneler, no one's seen Barney Google in ages.
Last time we saw Barney Google, he was in like a background shot looking in through a window with a big sign saying, Ensure killed my pappy.
Oh my God, there's no better way to put a button on that. So I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comic sponsorships.
Let's talk about it, my friend, because we're in the final week here of our comic sponsorship from Wacom over at wacom.com. And it actually raises a good point about digital workflow, because I was laughing with Beth on Friday before we left for the weekend, because every week, Brad, at the end of the week, we got like 3 hours to go before Brett's going to go home. And I'm like, drive. We got to get drive done. And so I want to tell you how the digital workflow between our two Wacom saves my bacon, because this is how. So Beth colors the strip for me, right? Yeah. And she's sitting literally across the room from me. We're back to back. We're both facing a wall. And I will literally be yelling out, all right, Brad, or all right, Beth, I got panel 3 done. And then she'll take that off a Dropbox and start coloring panel 3. And then 20 minutes later, oh, thank God, I got panel 4 done. All right. And then she starts pulling. And the kind of thing, it makes me think that if we were working analog that way, she would have to constantly grab the file from me, scan it, reline up the black line art, color on Photoshop from that. But the fact that we are able, workflow-wise, because it happens every week, no matter how hard I try, where the last 3 hours we are panically like finishing up drive, where I'm like, panel 5, panel 6, panel 7. And she's grabbing it off the server, and it honestly saves my bacon. So it's very appropriate that Wacom is sponsoring us for the podcast, because they literally save my bacon every week with my time management and workflow problems.
Amazing how many times people write into the show asking us for our thoughts on time management. And do you kind of get the feeling that if they could just see behind the curtain, they wouldn't ask those questions anymore?
Yeah, exactly. The man behind the curtain is actually sweating and very nervous in this Wizard of Oz story. Yeah.
Well, speaking of $5 questions for our Patreon backers, let's get into our first one. And it's one that Dave seems very well suited for you.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
And as a matter of fact, this comes in, and the name on the account is Make for Others. And it's a two-parter, Dave. And it says this. This is a two-part question. Dave, specific to your process with the stripped documentary, how did you balance the tension or having information presented economically to keep the story moving and also have it repeated in different and entertaining ways by the creators interviewed? And do you repeat information in long-form storytelling to the benefit of new or forgetful readers? Is it on a schedule basis, more by feel, some process, or not at all? Thanks for the podcast. So, Dave, we're going to start out talking about storytelling tension. And I would imagine for Stripped, this was something you had to put a lot of thought into, because in a documentary of this nature, of course, people were repeating some points that had already been brought up. You didn't know when those were going to be brought up until you actually were in the editing process. And if you get sloppy with that, and man, oh man, if you get sloppy with this, it really sticks out like a cold, like a sore thumb, or even a cold thumb. How did you do that?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Make for Others for directly addressing this question just to me, because I think the podcast works best when we just kind of focus on Dave. Don't you think, Brad? When we just
that's why I was taking such a long time with that question, because that's the last chance I'm going to get to talk for a while.
Oh my God, you are killing me today. I got to tell you guys, Brad and I have been talking this morning on the phone before the podcast, and you've just been killing me. You're on fire today with the zingers. I'm loving it.
I think you're just very easy today. I think they're I think they might have like an air quality issue over there, because you're a soft touch today. I don't know that I'm particularly
air quality
funny.
Issue. Can you imagine if I'm laughing more just because the smog levels in LA are really high today?
Yeah, there's less oxygen. It's making you giddy.
Anyway, so to answer the question, this is actually good to talk about, because it's informative for storytelling. So let's talk about additive versus subtractive storytelling. So comics are an additive storytelling. Filmmaking, and more specifically film editing, is a subtractive storytelling technique, right? Yeah. So with Stripped, Brad, we started off with 300 hours, no joke, 300 hours of comics interviews that we got down to roughly, I remember, about an hour and a half, hour and 20, I think, something like that. Anyway, so that process is like mining. You are chipping away in a mine looking for the vein of gold, right? And here's the thing, Brad, and I can say it. Let's just say it in terms of Brad's interview for Stripped versus anybody else. When I'm interviewing Brad might have said the perfect quote for Stripped, and we're like, that's going in the movie. But unfortunately, at that exact moment that Brad was saying that in the film, because it's very human nature, he was scratching at his nose, right?
Right.
And sometimes...
Well, you can tell the truth. It wasn't scratching. It was picking.
It was second knuckle. I mean, he had second knuckle up there, and it was just, it wasn't a good look. Because do you remember that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger with Mars, Brad, where we had to pull the red ball out of his nose? Anyway, this got too much detail. That movie does have the best line of all time from Arnold Schwarzenegger, though, which is "Get your ass to Mars." That's the best line. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that subtext. Anyway, so like, for example, I remember that there was a great quote from Jim Davis, and something happened, like something fell in the background of his office right as he was saying it.
No.
So in the middle of him saying the perfect, like, summarizing point about comics, he's like, well, comics are... fill in the blank, right? And right as he was saying that, literally something fell off the bookshelf behind him. And it's like, I mean, it's a human moment. You can't do anything about it, but you can't use it in a film, you know? So
no, and even if you go back and say, hey, Jim, say that again, it doesn't have the same spark. And now he's reading a line, and a lot of us don't read lines very well. And it's dreadful, right?
Brad, you're exactly right. Yes. So Brad's got it on the nose. And then sometimes there would be two quotes just by hook or by crook that would be said by the different cartoonists, but in the exact same way. So then you go, well, for variety and spice, we've used this cartoonist A lot. Let's use it from cartoonist B this time, right? Mm-hmm. And so anyway, editing has all sorts of choices like that that are not at all entering the picture of how you create comics. How you create comics is, Brad, I need a tree in the background of this dog saying woof, woof, woof. And so you draw a tree in the background of but in a documentary, you're finding things, and more ideally, you're finding things that are like diamonds in the rough of like an hour of terrible interview, but by God, there was one good sentence that's like gold, you know? Right. That actually did happen, Brad. We had an interview, I won't say the name of it, but an older cartoonist who for 90 minutes was like, and you're like, oh, for God's sakes, we're not going to use any of this. And then all of a sudden on minute 89, he goes, and comics are the perfect summary of, you know, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. We're using that line.
All of a sudden he had a moment of clarity.
Yeah.
and he got snapped out of, I remember when this was all farms.
Yeah. Suddenly Grandpa's pills kicked in and you're like, oh, hooray. Yeah. Anyway. All of that is to say that comics are additive, film editing is subtractive, right? And so we were, Ben, who is the wonderful editor on Stripped, Fred Schroeder, who's the amazing director, and then me, the schlub, who was also involved. We would go through, we had binders, Brad, full of quotes, and we would say, all right, we need something here to talk about the efficacy of pictures editorializing words, right? And then we would literally flip through 300 pages of quotes, and we'd be like, well, hold on, Meredith Grant said this at this time code, you know, this timestamp, whatever it is on her file.
Oh, my goodness.
And it took forever. Anyway, it took 4 years to make the film, guys. It's not a quick process. But so that's that process. But I think it's more helpful for our audience to talk about the additive process, Brad, of storytelling and when to do callbacks. So why don't you lead this discussion, Brad? Because I have talked far too long, even though this question was very specifically given to me, Brad.
Well, clearly this person wanted to hear from you, but at the risk of ruining it, what I always tell my students in my storytelling class is keep your audience on a need-to-know basis. In other words, I'm not a big fan of the story dump where at the very beginning you do all of your world building in one chapter and you go right to a granular level of the politics and the ecology and the social structure and everything, and then you start your story. I don't like that. Instead, I like to keep the idea of keeping your readers on a need-to-know basis. And for a comic, particularly one that's being released on the web, that is a real challenge. That becomes very, very difficult, because at the same time you're doing that, at least if you're following my kind of philosophy, you're also publishing that comic on the web in such a way that every update is meant to be somewhat standalone. Now, of course, it can't be completely standalone, but if your comic is impenetrable without understanding the comic before it, then it's not going to do a very good job of retaining readers, and you're not going to grow your comic that way. And so that's exactly why I publish my comic the way I do. I'm publishing a graphic novel, but I'm publishing it in half-page updates. And at every half-page mark, there's got to be something there that's significant, whether that's a punchline or a cliffhanger or a moment of importance. And I truly am writing it in such a way that I'm at least giving a new reader a really good fighting chance. If they're looking at, if they're coming in with panel 1 on that day, let's say it's page 12. and they're coming in at the bottom of the page. Still, with that first panel in the update to the last panel, there's got to be a chance for them to hold on. Now, that means it's really, really difficult once you start doing this for a long time. You've got a lot of backstory there, right? And there's a lot of stuff that you've purposefully planted because you want this to be read as a book. You planted little seeds maybe a year ago, and you're counting on people in knowing that that's the whole point of the story you're writing. But you know that not everybody has been reading from the first page. So at that point, then you do have to find clever ways, and I think there are a number of them. Yep. You've got to find some clever ways to clue those newer readers in. Part of that might be done in the story with the background character just mentioning something that in a sentence encapsulates it. Also, don't forget, you're publishing digitally. You've got a lot of tools at your hand that you can put some notes. You can put a snippet of the comic from 2 years back. That's important to understand. You can publish that alongside as a little a side note. Right. You've got the blog under the comic. You've got a lot of digital ways that you can do this that doesn't hamper the book that you're finally going to end up printing, but is going to help those online readers out that may not have been hanging around since page 1. So don't underestimate those digital answers as well. What do you think about that, Dave?
Yeah, no, I think the thing I really want to circle back around, because I think Brad was really onto something, was that first point you said about a need-to-know basis. And Brad hit on a lot of really good points throughout that I want to circle on and emphasize myself. So need-to-know basis is basically saying to Brad, as Brad himself said, don't dump it all on a page like, nah, here's everything you need to know to start this. Because it presents for lack of a better phrase, a wall of text that someone has to get through in order to start enjoying the story, right? Yeah. So let's look at different ways that stories start, okay? The Song of Ice and Fire, right? George R.R. Martin brought literally every character up to the north in a way that made no sense at all. Like even he himself said, there's no reason why everybody should appear in that first chapter. But he got everybody from from like 4 different kingdoms up to the north for that one meeting, right? And he introduced every character. And the reason that he did that was you introduce them all together, you show brief interactions, and then you scatter them to the wind, right? And that's how he started his story. Alternately, you can start a story with a single person and grow outward. And I'm trying to think of an example. The only one I have in mind is my own drive. Like you start with one person meets person 2, person 1 and 2 then meet person 3, and you start to build out your cast. That's another way to build a story, right?
Well, Star Wars, the original Star Wars was very much like that. We're introduced to the world through Luke Skywalker. Yeah.
Yeah. So the third way to start a story is exactly Luke Skywalker, but to start it in medias res, which means in the middle of the action.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Star Wars does that. It doesn't give you any explanation as to who the hell anybody is, but all of a sudden you see this little ship being chased by a big ship, and there's lasers, and you're immediately going, "Oh boy, what's happening? What the hell is all this?
Yeah.
Oh boy,
Yes.
oh boy, oh boy!" Right? And so, but you don't. I mean, you started off with a scroll, yes. But you don't start off like a scroll like the prequels did, where like the banking clans are at war with the Republic and the Senate is arguing and a lot of things are happening. And over here, there's some paint drying. And
Yeah. Who can remember all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you literally start off with the original Star Wars with pew, 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 and you're into it, right? And you figure out very quickly, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and then bam, you're into the hero story with Luke Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
And then, Brad, story type number 4, I don't know if you've seen it. Amazon has a new show called Carnival Row. Have you seen this one, Brad?
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've seen the previews. It looks great.
Yeah, so I started watching it last night and got really frustrated, and in a small way, and I'll share this with you because I think this is story number 4, and that is a story that barfs up a lot of pre-story in order to get you into the story.
Yeah.
And so the first 2 minutes of it, there's all these on-screen titles that are like, here's one warring faction, here's another warring faction. Oh, how about this warring faction? And this is why they're all warring. And this is here's what they had for breakfast today. And you're like, who cares? Get into the story.
Yeah.
And so that to me is the 4th story. And anyway, the reason why I wanted to bring up those 4 different types of storytelling, starting with a group, starting with a solo person, starting in medias res, or starting by barfing out a bunch of text, is that they will inform how you circle back around on the story. And so anyway, building off of that, I think Brad hit it on the head when he said, like, either a background character or a new character can suddenly become inquisitive about this or that. And that's a very natural way to circle back around on topics that you've already covered, right?
Yeah.
And I think even too, you could have a character who's a main cast member who is not on the same page as the other cast members. And who's like, I don't agree that we should be doing this, because, and then reviewing the topic.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So a little bit of conflict is actually your chance dialogue-wise, to review expectations, realities that have been set out in the story, and goals that everyone thinks or doesn't think that they all have shared together. Don't you think, Brad?
Yeah. Oh, and absolutely. And remember, every time somebody new enters the cast, or somebody who's an outsider comes into your story, that's an opportunity for you to have one of the established characters to clue this new person into what's going on. And in so doing, they're also acclimating anybody that might not have been starting from the very first page. And that's their opportunity to say, here's what's going on. Yeah.
Yes. And if you're strong in your storytelling too, they're not just repeating, and I've seen this in Brad's storytelling, they're not just repeating, they're giving you a different color, flavor, and texture of the same truth, right?
Yep.
And so what I mean by that is, do you remember the old story, Brad? It's a really helpful story of the 5 blind people trying to describe a camel or an elephant to one another.
Yes.
And so one of them describes the tusk as, this animal is clearly strong like a tree and hard. And, the other one says, no, it's like a snake because they're holding the trunk. And the other one says, no, it's like a tree trunk because they're holding a leg. And another one's holding the tail and saying, no, this is like a... Anyway, long story short, you all know what that story is. What I'm getting at is when Brad introduces a new character, they're not just repeating the same truth. They're giving a different flavor so you get a fuller whole picture, a holistic picture from a different angle of that same truth or story point reality.
Remember, when you're writing dialogue, anytime somebody is talking about another person, they're actually talking about 2 people at the same time. They're talking about the person they're describing, and at the same time, in so doing, they're describing themselves.
That is a super good point. Yes,
right?
I love that. Good point, Brad.
I'm saying, when I say Dave Kellett is XYZ, I'm talking about Dave, and also I'm telling the reader about me, about who I am in relation to Dave. And
that is such a great point. Yes.
Yeah. And you got a lot of opportunities to do that. And that's something that's not wasted time. That's not like re-rolling the scroll on Star Wars and saying, okay, to catch you up, here's everything that's gone on. No, that's doing it as part of the story. And you're not only catching up any new readers to what's going on, but you're giving context and, more importantly, nuance to existing readers who are just going to eat that stuff up.
Yep, it's the nuance that's key because let's say
Yeah.
in chapter 1 we established that we have a good and fair king, right? And the
Yeah.
king rules justly. But then all of a sudden in chapter 3 we meet an ex-knight. Now the ex-knight could say the king, I don't agree with the king's values, and that's why I'm an ex-knight, right? Or you could have the knight saying that king is a son of a bitch, and in the meantime he's drunk and he's throwing his wine around or in the room,
Right.
and he's slapping people around. And so, in so doing, to Brad's point, you learn the nuances of that character. He's not just against the king. He himself is a jerk and probably a drunk and, all that sort of stuff. All little things
Right.
that give you the flavor of that character. So, yes, Brad, you're exactly on point.
Yeah, and then take that one step further. Is he a justifiable drunk, or is he a bad mean drunk? In other words, as he's throwing his fit, one of the side line lookers is going to look at him. Now, how do they look at him? If they look at him with pity, then here's a guy that was once good that is so frustrated with the king that he's, drink himself into oblivion, right? He's a sad story. Or does the onlooker look at that drunk with anger? Now this guy is belligerent. He's a bully. He's always been like that. And so maybe the king isn't such a bad guy after all, because the people that hate him are not good guys, right?
Right, and that's a little bit of flavor, even with repeating story, that's a little bit of flavor that you can add to your story. So it doesn't feel like you're going, and everyone remember, the king is the king. You're like, all right, we get that part,
Right. And don't be hammy about it. You don't need somebody coming in and saying, thank you, King. That's a great thing that you said. Now I'm reminded why everybody always says you're such a good guy, because you are a good guy, King. We can take it a little bit further than that.
Right. Page enters stage left, holding script. The king is a nice king because he is a good king. Exit stage left. You don't exactly. Do you want even the repetitive parts of your story, the parts where you're reinforcing what the main storyline is? Even that is adding flavor, or it's advancing the plot somehow. So you can, to the question asker who specifically asked to me, you can. I thought that would get a reaction out of Brad, didn't?
I was too busy biting through my lip.
You can, of course, repeat, and you want to repeat, because even well-intentioned readers forget. Like I forget all the time certain things in a story. So you do want to remind people, yes, and you do want to do it not on a scheduled basis, but by feel. And intuition of like, it's been a long time since I've mentioned this storyline. I should probably just sprinkle it back in again a little bit.
Yeah.
When you do it, and it's okay to do it, when you do it, you just want to make sure that it either adds color or advances the storyline in some point. Don't you think, Brad?
One last thought before we turn the page on this, and that is don't forget you've got background items. You've got stuff in the scene that isn't the forefront of the storytelling, but is still doing its share of storytelling. So, if somebody, I'm going to make this blindingly obvious, if somebody is a criminal and they're walking through a street and there's a wanted poster with his face on it, right? There's a little something you can do to remind people that, oh yeah, this guy's maybe a crook, right? You've got a lot of background and ancillary items that you've got to draw anyway. You got to make a good background anyway. You might as well make it do some of the storytelling for you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Scott Kurtz once said, Brad, to us that lettering is in a way a secret character. But in a way also, I think even he would say, and you and I would say, that the environment and the background is also a character. It tells you so much about where somebody chooses to live, right? Or how they choose to live, or the environment that they choose to work in. And so when you draw it a certain way, you're letting people know, this person might seem like they've got it all together, but really their house is a mess and they're falling apart inside. That
right. Yeah, that's taking your storytelling to the next level.
Exactly. All right, well, I think that's a great last point to end that one on, so let's move on to the next question.
Very good. This one comes in from our Patreon backer, Jay Lark, who says, what best practices would you recommend for a webcomic newsletter? And he's thinking specifically, but not limited to, frequency, what to include, how to get sign-ups, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
I'm not going to step on that. You've been such a great guy today. I'm not going to make fun of you. Nope. I'm not going to do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, Dave, what do you think? Let's talk newsletters. What's some advice that you can share with Jay? I know you do a newsletter.
So I really, the one thing I want to focus in on is, Jay, you forgot to just address that specifically to me. So in the future, when you
Jay,
email in, you don't want to include
careful.
Brad, because that's going to be trouble. So anyway, all right. So no, to answer Jay's question. So email newsletters. So I send out on a daily and a weekly basis using MailChimp, MailChimp.com. An email. It's not really a newsletter. It's basically a down and dirty version of my website emailed to people, right? So it has that day's comic, one or two of the chosen ads that I'd like to present in terms of my own in-house ads. I mean, like, hey, get a Sheldon pin, or hey, get a Sheldon book, that kind of stuff. And then the most recent 1 to 3 blog entries, right? And so it lets people know and keep up to date on where I'm going, what am I going to be appearing at, what new books I have, and here's the comic and all that sort of stuff. So that people can choose to either sign up for just Sheldon, just Drive, both of them, on a basis whenever the comic comes out, or just once a week. And frankly, I understand why people might sign up for just the once a week one. But anyway, so that's what I do. But I think Jay specifically, though, in this case, Brad, is asking more about kind of text-heavy newsletters in the sense of like what newsletters used to be, don't you think?
Well, I think he's trying to find his way. In other words, I think if you told him that text-heavy newsletters were the way to go, he'd start writing more text. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes and no. I will say this, though. That was an evil
question.
I will say this to Brad and Jay. I have heard through the grapevine that cartoonists and, frankly, creators of all types are having increasing success with their newsletters, their emailed newsletters, in a way that, since RSS is stumbling, and since so many social media platforms have algorithms that limit how many people see it, even when they've signed up for it, that email is proving to be one of the most efficacious way to reach people on a direct basis, without limiters being set on it, and when exactly you want to reach people, right? So people that I've noticed that do it well, Ryan North of Squirrel Girl does a nice email newsletter. Hillary Price of Rhymes with Orange does a nice newsletter. Both of those are infrequent, which I think adds to the potency of when you get the email, don't you think, Brad?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
because it stands out more. But what do you think, Brad? I actually want to hear your thoughts. All joking aside, I've been talking too much. What are your thoughts about an email newsletter?
I've got tons of thoughts on this, and along with Dave, my email newsletter is on autopilot, and I too do it through MailChimp. Although, now that we've got this question, I'm wondering whether there isn't a better solution. MailChimp is kind of like the go-to. But I'm not thrilled with it for a number of reasons. And so here's some of the things that I think about when I'm doing my newsletter, and some of the things that I think you should think about too. Mostly that is this: the more HTML, given my understanding, by the way, there might be somebody that has a much better understanding of email newsletters who's going to write in and correct me. And if that's the case, I'll share that with you in an upcoming show. But my understanding of email newsletters is the less HTML, the less coding and stuff of like that you put into an email, the more chances that recipient is going to actually get the email that you sent them, and it's not going to get sidelined into their spam folder. And spam is something you've got to really, really look out for in an email newsletter. And one of the things that I've read increases your chances of getting marked as spam is a whole lot of HTML in your newsletter. The other thing that I don't like about it, so the first part of that is, I try to limit the doodads and try to make it as simple as I can. The problem with that is that the MailChimp template makes that image that you're sending out very, very small. And in other words, for me to put my half-page update into an email newsletter, it becomes too small to be read. And I've got the same philosophy for that I've got for social media. If I'm going to send something out through an email newsletter, I expect that person to read the comic in the email, not to click on it and be sent to a website. That's dopey, right? And I don't think that because I check on what I'm sending out, and mine goes out every time my site updates. I don't think that's happening. I don't think it's really being effective. And so it's low on my list of priorities. But at some point, I've got to find a solution that is much more readable. Now, what goes in the newsletter? In my opinion, that's what has been going on in your blog, and I'm still a big fan of using that blog. It's still important for SEO and for outreach.
Yep.
You're still, I've never stopped blogging.
Boy, don't we know it?
Yeah. But all the stuff that goes into your newsletter is just recycled blog stuff and stuff that maybe hit particularly well on social media, any Patreon outreach, any Kickstarter outreach, stuff like that. And then frequency, that is something that you have to gauge yourself. Since Dave and I are kind of fix it and forget it guys when it comes to this, ours goes out every time we update with a new comic on our site. You might be better off to do it as a monthly deal or even every couple months where you give them a bigger dump of stuff. But since it comes less frequently, it's something that is more special. I could definitely see you experimenting with that. And the final point I've got to make is just as a reminder, remember, if you are going to get into the email newsletter gig, you've got to make sure that somewhere along the bottom is an option for your person to unsubscribe.
God, yes.
Not only is it polite, but it's dangerous. In other words, if you don't have that, somebody can forward that to the FCC and say, hey, this guy's a spammer. And then your email gets flagged. And then when you do send email through that account, even if it's not a newsletter, even if it's a business letter that you're sending to somebody, you're more likely to get sent into spam because now you're a known spammer. So avoid that. Do a little reading on how to send a proper email. It's particularly something that's mass sent out, and your first thing to look at is make sure you've got that unsubscribed there. Don't you think?
I do, and in fact, you nailed all three of the final points that I was going to make, and I'm actually quietly high-fiving you because that you put all the nails in the coffin. So let's move on to the next question, my friend. What do you think?
That sounds good.
Well, before we do, actually, I should mention, I think when this show airs, I will be in the final week of my Kickstarter.
Oh, really?
And I will just say in friendship to everybody, if you like the podcast, if you like my comics, hey, maybe consider getting yourself a Sheldon book over at anatomykickstarter.com. I would appreciate it greatly. The book is going to be gorgeous. It's going to be hardcover, cloth wrap spine, beautiful full color all throughout. It's really, Brad's seen it. It's one of the prettiest type books that I make with these anatomy books. And
it really is.
I would love to have you jump in on it. We're making it. It's already made the Kickstarter goal. We're well into the stretch goals over at anatomykickstarter.com. And I thank you for your support. Brad, shall we move on to this next question?
Yes.
Let's do it. This comes in from Angela Boyle, and it says, Dear Dave, this is specifically to Dave, who I love, Dave. This is Dave, specifically for Dave. No, I'm just kidding. So Dave and Brad, as self-publishers, do you hire proofreaders before sending out book for print? How do you find them? Brad, having read your books, I have to ask you, what happened to the proofreaders? Just kidding.
You son of a gun. No, the answer is I hire proofreaders. Oh man, I need a proof talker. I hire proofreaders. And I've got a lot of quote unquote volunteer proofreaders, and I want to talk about that. I want to come around to that. But yes, before my book comes out, I put a PDF together. I ship that out to somebody who is a qualified editor, somebody who's got actual editing credentials and has the right stuff for that. Somebody who's just not going to be looking for spelling and grammar, but really is going to be giving that story a good once over in terms of polish. So if there's anything glaring, I still have a chance, even though editing a comic is very difficult. I still have a chance to catch anything that's glaring. And of course, my spelling is atrocious. So I always need a little bit of help when it comes to that. So yes, definitely spend a little money, add that into your Kickstarter. Spend money on having your work edited and proofed correctly. Now, here's another one.
Okay.
We've all got a number of editors who are volunteering. Mainly, this would be Patreon backers, people that follow us on social media, and of course, the people who are reading on the websites. And they are going to point things out as they see problems. Number one, this is a good thing. I know nobody likes to get an email that says, you misspelled prestidigitation, right? Nobody likes to get that email.
Right.
But you need to know that.
Exactly.
I always say that I always know I've got a misspelling. When I put something out on Patreon and I get a response within the first 2 minutes, I know it's a spelling error.
Yeah.
The other stuff takes a little bit longer to come, but man, when people see a spelling error, they jump right on it, and that's something you need to do. But I think we need to talk about how that process is going. But before we get any further down, what's your approach to proofreading, Dave?
So you mentioned both the techniques that I use. One is, to Brad's point, you have a network of 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 proofreaders every day when your digital comic goes out.
Yeah.
Now, here's the weird and wonderful thing. 80% of the people either won't notice or won't comment on a spelling error. But the 1, 5, 10% of people that will comment on it, when they do, don't put it off in terms of correcting the original file. I have done that where I'll be like, when I get back in the studio on Monday, I gotta correct that file, that kind of a thing. Do it right away, because that kind of direct feedback is, if you keep up with it, you've done a lot of the heavy lifting of your editing of your book before you even start laying it out in InDesign, right? So that's step number one. So Brad's right about that. And then the second one that I do is, I have done 3 things. I have printed and proofed my own books. I have hired proofreaders. And I have used distributed volunteer proofreading. I almost said fundraising. And I have to say, the technique that I love the best has proved to be distributed volunteer proofreading. And I'll tell you why, Brad.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, Brad. I used to work as a proofreader for 2 years when I was first out of college. No,
I did not know that.
Of all things, in a medical device magazine, Brad. So if you were wondering, did Dave Kellett have an exciting job right out of college? The answer, Brad, is no. No, Dave Kellett did not have an exciting job. It was me, 2, 3 other editors, none of whom had any social skills, and we were working on a medical device magazine. Oh boy, isn't that fun?
Oh, God.
So I read and learned a lot about heart stent valves and about artificial hips. But boy, oh boy, was that a shit job, and I hated it.
Whoa. Yeah. And the 2 personalities that you were sharing space with sounds like they were a delight as well, right?
Well, you know what's funny? When you get out of college with a liberal arts degree, you have your friend that got a computer science degree immediately getting hired by some company for $150,000 a year. You have another friend that got a business degree being hired by Deloitte for $80,000 a year, and then you get a job editing a medical device magazine for about $28,000 or $32,000 a year, and you want to jump off a cliff. It was not the best. Anyway. That is too much information about me. Okay, so here's the advantage of distributed proofreading, is that having worked as a proofreader, I was pretty good. Like, I'm pretty good at proofreading, and I'm pretty good at spelling, and pretty good at all the rules of grammar and stuff like that. But every human has their blind spots. Every human does. Either a certain kind of mark that you never notice when it's made wrong, a certain kind of spelling that's when it's incorrect. For whatever reason, your brain just never notices it, right? We all have our blind spots.
Yeah.
And so even a good proofreader misses a percentage of mistakes, right? And so for me, with distributed proofreading, one of the fun things I do is I say, hey, if anyone would like an advanced ebook right now, you'll get it today. You get it for free. All I ask is that however many or however few pages you'd like to proofread, you just send me the notes along with your qualifications as a proofreader. And what happens, Brad, is people go, hey, I edited a law journal. And the other one says, oh, I teach 9th grade English. And another one says, oh, I happen to be a writer out of Washington. I normally write novels, but I would love to proofread a little bit. It's actually relaxing to me. And oddly enough, Brad, there are personalities that they're like the pedantic type personalities that love to find the little mistakes, and let you know.
I know.
But when you distribute it between 10 people, The amazing thing is like 40% of the mistakes they'll all catch, but then the other 60, only one or two different people caught them. And only by having distributed it to 10 different people do I get all the errors. So that's the way I do it.
That's interesting.
And the trade-off is I tend to either send them a gift or something, or I give them the ebook for free, depending on the situation. And that works out great. A lot of people are really happy to do it. They're happy to be involved, and they enjoy the process of proofreading, especially work that they like. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
Now, tell me, Brad, more specifically about the proofreaders you've hired.
Well, not the hired ones. I'm going to talk because the hired ones I have. It's all been a very smooth relationship. But not too long ago on social media, I shared this because I really did want to know whether it was just me being grumpy and touchy and thin-skinned, all of which is very possible and downright probable, or whether it was like a deeper thing. And I said on Twitter, is it just me, or when somebody takes the time to type out the word before they make a correction to your comic, does it freaking drive you up the wall and make you crazy, or is it just me? And the amount of emotionally charged responses I got to that let me know that it was not just me. Somebody who's got to say, isn't I before E except after C, or whatever it is, isn't it more proper to say that we went to the beach instead of us went to the beach? I get it. You're being helpful, but if you're if you're typing out the word or at the beginning of your sentence, I need to tell you as a friend, although we appreciate you, you're coming off as condescending, and it's causing a lot of angst. just judging on my Twitter responses that I got from that. I'm not the only one. And also we don't need a joke response. We don't need you to try to be clever or funny. That just the other day I had something where I'd included an extra A, and I said, don't forget the Fantastic Four. And somebody says, does that mean that there's a B Fantastic Four? Listen, it's a typo. Just freaking send me a note. And also, now this is for the people that are really ahead of the curve. You want to send me a note about a typo? Don't do it in public. Don't do it on Twitter. I don't want it on Facebook. I don't want it on a Patreon comment. Send me a freaking email. I can't tell you how much I appreciate a nice, straightforward email. Hey, Brad, I caught a typo in the third panel. I think you meant to say, 3 people instead of 2 people. In the earlier version, there was 2. Whatever. I don't need it on Twitter. I don't need it in Patreon. Just send me a polite little email. There are some people who get it, and I appreciate these people so freaking much. And to the people who think that they've got to put and then be funny, there's lots of chances for happy, joyful interactions. Pointing out a typo isn't one.
You know why?
It's something that go ahead, because I feel like I'm being thin-skinned. But again, I got so many people that were joining me on this. Get me out of this.
So correcting a typo is a kindness. Correcting a typo with an or an in front of it, that's a power move. And that's like someone trying to make themselves feel better about themselves.
Oh, you're so right.
Like, my day may be shitty, but I knew that spelling error that Brad Guigar didn't know. So I feel pretty good about myself. I did that power move. He knew what was up. Yeah. That kind of thing. Like, you just gotta or even worst case scenario, even if you are going to feel self-righteous about it, fine, keep it to yourself. But in general, my life advice with someone when you have to point out a correction is lead with a compliment first. Yeah. That's always a nice way to do it. It lets you know that at least it's sincere.
That's what I do.
And it's friendship. And it's like, hey, Brad, also just in friend-to-friend stuff, like, Brad, I think you're great, but you've got to work on that foot odor or whatever it is, like whatever. If it's sincerely couched, everyone will, even with a moment of reflection, go, you know what? I'm glad that Brad pointed out that my hair looks terrible, and he was nice about it.
Right.
Anyway, to Brad's point, if you do it with kindness, if you keep it simple and clear, and if you don't do a power move with it, like, well, Brad, I see that. Also, being funny about pointing out a typo, you're kind of kicking somebody when they're down, unfortunately.
Yeah, because here's the other side of that. Number one, like Dave said, it's a kindness that you're pointing out a typo. It really is. But here's the deal. We just got done working our ass off to give you to present that comic to you. I think about what Dave was saying about Drive at the top of the show. He's muscling this thing out. Him and Beth are juggling panels back and forth, and there was a ton of work that went into every step along the way, writing and penciling and composition. We're presenting this thing to you, and honest to God, in that moment, all we want to hear is how great we are. It's not reasonable, but there's not a cartoonist alive. I'm the only one who's enough of a jerk to say it out loud. But we want to hear how great we are, and we know that every now and again we're not going to be great, and not everyone is going to be a home run. We get that, but that's what our hearts are filled with in that moment. And if the first thing we hear is a typo, thank you. I'm glad. I don't want it in the book. That's wonderful. But have a little cognizant that you're dealing with an emotionally fragile, creative person who just poured his heart out into those pixels, and it wants you to be entertained and overjoyed and thrilled and compelled.
Yeah.
And yes, I used affect instead of effect. I get it, but still, wasn't there something more in it than that?
Yeah, well, and so if we're going to be small and petty for a moment, Brad, let me share this with you. There have been times when people correct my typo as though, and the tone is as though, Brad, they have never made a typo themselves. And so, can I tell you the power move that I sometimes do back?
Oh, please, because I'm feeling very exposed right now. Go ahead.
No, even your old pal Dave Kellett could be pretty petty sometimes. So if they try to pull a power email proclaiming that they've never made a typo, what I do is I point out the typos in their email telling me the typo that I had in my comic. I'm not kidding. I've been that small. Because they took this haughty-toity attitude of like, well, there's a reason why the delineation of there and there happened. I'm like, yeah, I know how English works. I just made a subconscious typo. But here's the 3 typos I found in your email. You might want to work in this, this, and this. And because if they're going to be little shits about it, I'm like, listen, I got 2 grad degrees. I don't need a lecture from you on how to write. Thanks very much.
Yeah, 2 can play at this game.
Yeah, exactly. I could be a dick too if you want. Anyway, so that's the way to sum up though. Proofreading. To sum up, proofreading is important.
I like how your tone just changed. Yeah, you're a real jerk and I hate you. To sum up though, proofreading is really an important part of the everyday life of a working web cartoonist.
No, but here's the capstone that we want. Now, you might come away from this thinking, well, like proofreading isn't important. That's not at all what Brad and I are saying. It actually can pull someone out of a fabricated universe really quickly to have a typo when you're enthralled in this world, and then suddenly a word pops out or a grammatical problem. By God bless America. Why is this happening when I'm trying to talk about English? It suddenly yanks you out of the story, and it's ruinous. So that's why we're saying, do listen to these typos when they're pointed out. Do listen to your proofreaders when they point out an error. And in fact, do get proofreaders in whatever way, shape, or form you choose is best for you. But it has to be done. It should be done because it helps maintain the very thin skein of fabricated universe that you're trying to create with your story to have the English flow as smoothly and subconsciously as possible.
Yes.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So, Brad, our last question for the day comes in from Jeremy, and Jeremy writes, Dave and Brad, for printing a book, what extras are must-haves, strongly should consider, nice to have, and pass? I have heard Dave mention several times to get your book shrink wrapped or UV something, ? And several other items for your Kickstarter. I was hoping for a full list that includes both Dave's and Brad's suggestions, since I will be doing one for the first time soon. This is a good question, Brad, because frankly, there are many different answers for this for a first-time book. So let's hear what Brad Guigar has to say about what are the must-have features for a book.
Well, listen, when it comes to something like this, especially your first book, when it comes to the topic of must-have, my list is very short, because what I want you to do for your first book is just get that book out. And you got enough moving parts right now that you don't need me putting things on your list. So must-have features for your first book, a cover and pages. The end. just get your book
Brad
out.
Guigar, professional dad.
Okay?
Just go to school. That's step one. Step one is just grab your backpack and go to school.
Just get the listen, I'll die on that hill, because you and I both know that it can be very daunting to get that book out. So taking on extra stuff, I don't see the need for it. And by the way, when I just said those two things, there's a whole lot of decision making that goes into those things that are going to keep you up at night. Do you want glossy pages? Do you want matte pages? Do you want thick paper? Do you want thin paper?
I'm going to let Brad keep going, but I really want to emphasize this, is that there is a lot of complication in a book, a lot of stuff that you're not even considering yet, that you haven't even faced as a problem yet. And keeping it simple to two choices, what kind of cover and what kind of interior, that's a lot. I did 14 books just with those two questions, and it was confusing and not harrowing, but it was a lot of work. That's the best way to say it. So my first, it was my first 14 books. My first 10 books were just, what kind of soft cover am I going to do, and what kind of interior am I going to do? And those were the only two questions I had, and that was fine. I built a career off of that. So I'm going to let you keep going, Brad. I just wanted to emphasize that point you were making.
No, and not only that, but there's so much you learn as you see how your books evolve over time. In other words, I was using too thin of a stock on my first Evil Ink Volume 1, right? And so I noticed how those covers started to curl over time. And I thought, no, I don't want that to happen. I got to go up a thickness in that cover, And I went from, I had uncoated stock for the interior pages, and I didn't like how that, and I tried a thinner paper that was less expensive, but then I could see the colors going through from the other side of the page. That wasn't good. I learn a lot by doing things wrong. I don't know if you noticed this, but so will you. And you don't need more variables than cover and pages for that first book or so, and maybe even your second and third book. But okay, let's say that, of course, that's not the answer that Jeremy wants. Jeremy wants more. So let's go on to the next level. This is nice to have stuff.
Okay.
And the top of the list there is going to be hardcover, right? You want to, and we've said this in an earlier show. I remember talking about this because the person had it backwards. They're like, well, I'm going to do a hardcover, then I'll offer a soft cover later. I think that process is exactly backwards. You should be offering a soft cover because, number one, it's more manageable, easier to do, and it's less expensive. And it's probably what your backers are going to want in the first place. And then offering an upgrade or a stretch goal or something like that with the hardcover is fantastic.
Yep.
And there's a whole set of variables that have to do with the hardcover. So my first nice to have item is a hardcover. What do you think, Dave? What's top of your list on nice to have stuff?
I'm gonna go a different route.
Okay.
I would say the best way to start a book, to just get it out into the world, is to say black and white interior. Now, that's kind of boring. It's kind of old school. But frankly, it's quite lovely in a Kickstarter when you can jump up to say, now it's full color, right? And maybe you were all along intending to go full color. But it is a cost difference to do black and white to full color. I will be honest to say, though, that most people, a reading experience of black and white isn't what it used to be because newspapers had kind of primed people for black and white in their comics. And so even Bone, even the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they've all been recolored because people just don't like black and white anymore. So maybe Brad is right now that I'm saying this out loud. Maybe you do want to go color. No, I'm saying this is I'm kind of thinking
I can hear you debating this through as you're going.
Yeah, you can hear the little mouse on its wheel in my brain just going, well, I'm doing my best. No, I think maybe Brad's right. Maybe hardcover is the better first nice to have. And again, I'll echo Brad by saying it's nice to have. None of these are must-haves. I will, in kindness, though, share the paper quality that I use for my softcover books, because this might save you a step. For my most recent purely softcover book, I went with a 300 GSM coated one-side artboard. And then for my interior text, I went with 128 GSM matte art paper. And that was a 4x4 color. That just means 4 on one side, 4 colors on one side, 4 on another side, because it's offset printing. And then for the cover, I did a 4-1 cover. That means 4 colors on the exterior, and in this case, I had a 1-color interior. You do not need to have any color on the interior of a soft cover, so you could go 4-0, which is 4 colors on the outside, 0 colors on the inside. And then I had a one-side matte lamination, and lamination is just, for lack of a better phrase, a plastic coating kind of sprayed onto the book or appliqued onto the book over the printing press. And it gives it kind of how would you describe lamination, Brad? It gives it a smooth, kind of plasticky, clean feel, right?
And firmer. It gives it a little stand-up-to-ness. You know, it'll stand up to more
scratches,
knocks and bumps.
And also,
stuff like that.
I believe I'm right in saying this, it does add a little vibrancy to the colors as light hits it, I think. Doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. That laminate makes that color bounce a lot more. In fact, that's why my interior pages, I have a semi-gloss on them, because it makes the pages a little bit stiffer. It gives it a little bit more oomph to those pages, and the colors, I think, are much more vibrant. Which for Evil Ink, I definitely want that.
And
right?
listen,
for Drive,
at Brad's age,
you're going monochrome on Drive.
I was just going to say real quick, though, Brad, that at Brad's age, anything that adds stiffness is something that he's looking forward to. It's just,
believe me.
Anything that holds the darkness at bay there. Anyway, the reason why I want to mention the lamination on the exterior cover, though, is because I want to contrast that with what's called spot UV, which is different than lamination. Yeah. Okay, so spot UV is, let's say Brad has Lightning Lady on the cover of his most recent Evil, or his next Evil Ink book, right? But he wants her to pop from the cover in a way that adds both a little dimensionality and a little bit of interplay with light. And so what he would request is a very specific plate of spot UV exactly on her line art and covering all her coloring. So what that does is, as you tilt the book, the spot UV makes it look like she has a little bit of three-dimensionality. The light catches her more than it catches the rest of the book. So even though lamination is essentially plastic and spot UV is essentially plastic, spot UV is probably 1/64th of an inch raised off the book. Maybe not even that, maybe 1/28th of an inch, 128th of an inch off the book. But it also catches the light better. Right, Brad? Do you think I'm describing that correctly?
And not only that, but because of that 1/64th, it gives your cover a tactile experience that is nice, because now you've got different surfaces there as you run your fingers along the cover. If you search on webcomics.com, I have an explanation of what spot UV gloss is and how to set it up. And I believe it's a public post, so you don't need to be a subscriber to get that information. But it also has a little video of me with an old Bloom County book that had spot UV gloss, and I'm tilting it back and forth so you can see the different way the light hits it. So if you're wondering what Dave's talking about with spot UV, go over to webcomics.com and put it in the search there, and you'll see that I've written about this. But here's a question I wanted to ask you, Dave. So everything that we've talked about so far, I've done. The one thing I haven't done that I'm wondering if this should be on my nice to have list would be a dust jacket. I've never done a dust jacket. Should I be thinking about a dust jacket for my next book?
Well, what I was going to do, Brad, and so we can go to dust jackets next. I was going to take people through all the different features that I've done over the years. And so let's go to dust jackets next. So a dust jacket is specifically, you can use it on a soft cover, let's be clear. But boy, does it look and feel stupid to have a dust jacket on a soft cover book, right? So a dust jacket is basically anyone who's ever gone and picked up a nice book in a bookstore, intuitively, a dust jacket is just a single page printed and wrapped around a hardcover book. I did it for Drive. I've historically, there's different reasons why dust jackets existed. It was basically to extend the life of a book so that this dust jacket would take a beating for the first 10 or 15 years. And then as it fell apart, then the book would have its regular old cover and it would still keep living in your shelf, right? That kind of a thing. But dust jackets also have a nice aesthetic reason. So for Drive, what I did was I had one dust jacket that's essentially the marketing and sales dust cover for when the book worked in the world. And then when you took that off, the interior cover of the Drive book looked like it was a book from the Empire in my story, which was kind of fun. Like it had a look as though it was held, like it even said held in the official royal family library, and it had their different insignias for imprimatures and all that sort of stuff on it. So it's kind of fun. So the interior cover you can have fun with as a very different look. And for my Drive books, I've done UV on the interior cover. I've done foil stamping, which is a different thing that we can talk about. A one-color foil stamping, which is basically just a very, 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 very thin sheet of either metal or metal-like objects. Usually a one color, so you can get like a red foil or a silver foil or a gold foil that just gives it a little pop. Think of like maybe a Bible, a really nice Bible you saw one time might have had little thin lines of gold going through it, right? That was a gold foil stamping that was done on the cover. But anyway, Brad, the number and quality of a dust jacket, you can consult with your printer, but there's pretty standard and accepted numbers for what quality paper you want to have and this and that. And again, for that kind of thing, you'd want to do a 4-0 print, meaning four color plates on the outside and 0 on the inside for a dust jacket, and you're good to go. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, actually two other things I wanted to mention, were built-in ribbon bookmarks and then shrink wrapping. Okay, so let's do built-in ribbon bookmark first. So a built-in ribbon bookmark is exactly what it sounds like. It is a bookmark that's been built into the book. It is literally glued into the spine of the book. It has to be usually a hardcover. I tried to do it once with a softcover, and the printer did not have the ability to mount it in a softcover for a bunch of reasons that I could explain. So it's usually done in a hardcover. It's usually either some type of cloth or metallic-looking cloth that looks classy, and it basically is just letting you mark your page as you close your book, right? We all know what a bookmark is. They cost various ranges, but none are too expensive. But it really, to me, adds a lot of class to a book. When you put one in.
Really does.
It's really a nice look. And then the final thing that I would mention would be shrink wrap. And shrink wrap is, I both love it and hate it. I hate it in the sense that I hate to add plastic to the world, just as a citizen concerned about where we're going. But I do love it in the sense that I have had more than a few books that were delivered onto a snowy doorstep, or literally the postman put it into a puddle at the front door and the book was ruined. So you have to balance out the waste of the plastic shrink wrap versus the waste of an entire book that now has to be remailed for all the additional costs and ecological harm that does. What I've come down on the side of actually a shrink wrap is helpful because you are wasting less books. The shrink wrap takes the hit, and you don't have to do any replacements of books that took a beating in shipping or that were left in water or this or that. So now that we reviewed all of that, Brad, what are your must-haves? What are your nice-to-haves? And what are your go ahead and take a pass-ons?
Must-haves is a good cover and good inside pages and shrink wrap.
Really? Okay.
I think at this point shrink wrap is definitely a must-have. That's a must-have. Nice to have is hardcover option and dust jackets. And whatever that third list is, like have some fun if you want to have it. That's where I put ribbons and things like UV gloss and foil stamping and all that other stuff. That's the stuff that once you're really good at putting a book out and you kind of know what you're doing, now you can experiment with things like UV gloss and foil stamping. And it's okay if that doesn't happen on your first book. If you're in comics and you're listening to this show, your view should be the long view, not the short view. And so, it sounds, Brad is preventing me from having fun because he says I shouldn't do UV stamping or UV spot gloss on my first book. Yeah, you're right. You shouldn't. But that doesn't mean that once you re-release that book as part of a omnibus and take your first, second, and third book and re-release those as a new thing,
right?
Now you can experiment with that sodium ribbon and your spot UV gloss. This is not the last time you're ever going to print a book, my friend, if you're doing well. So don't get that upset, but do listen to us when we say this is your first book, cover and inside pages, and get to the point where you can do that well, and then kick it up a notch. What I don't want you to see you doing is try to have all of this stuff going with dust jackets and foil stamping and UV gloss and all this other stuff, and you get so convoluted with all of these different variables that you don't put out a good book. And that's even worse than putting out a simple book that's very good and getting those people ready for the next Kickstarter. You put out a book that's crap because you tried to bite off more than you could chew, you're going to hurt your chances on your next Kickstarter.
Brad has really put the steel in my spine here, and I'm going to put a stake in the ground and say, here's what you should do for your first book.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. It's going to be hard enough for you to produce a good book. So do a 4-color interior, soft cover book, laminated, shrink wrap. That's it. Yep. That's all you got to do. Color cover, obviously, but color interior, color cover, shrink wrap, laminated exterior. That's it. Don't add any complication, because frankly, that sounds like a simple list. You're going to be pulling your hair out with 1,000 questions for the printer, and you're going to wish you didn't have so much complication, even with those 4 things.
Yeah.
So do what I just described for your first 3 books. Honest to God, do it for your first maybe 5 books. Then, to Brad's point, once you start feeling fancy, then add a spot UV, then add a foil stamp, then add a hardcover. Keep your Kickstarter simple. Don't even do the thing, and Brad might disagree with me, but I think in his heart he would say it's reasonable. Keep it simple. Just say, no, we're just doing a soft cover this first book. We're not going to do hardcover and soft cover or a stretch goal of a hardcover. Brad, don't you think, like, just in the terms of keep it simple, stupid, like, just get it out. Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, keep it simple. No, you don't want to say any of that stuff out loud because that's not good marketing. Your Kickstarter.
I'm not going to say like.
Don't say it out loud, but you should do it. Yes.
Yeah, I don't ever say marketing stuff like, why am I doing just a soft cover? Because I don't know what I'm doing. You don't want to do that.
Right.
But I think, honestly, to Brad really hit it on the head where he said something like, iterate on doing the simple version a few times, get it down, then move on. In the same way that you have to walk before you run, don't try to design in a lot of ways, a better way to say this is, comics is the art of the possible, right? Like, tomorrow, Brad could decide to recreate the Sistine Chapel in the background of an Evil Ink. He could do that, and it could take him 6 months to draw that panel. But why? Like, why would he do that? The comics is a simplified art form of writing and drawing brought together magically to create something even more powerful than either could do alone. Right. But it does it in the art of the possible. It's a single artist producing and telling a story. So don't tackle things that are unnecessarily complicated for what your art and what your story requires. And the same is true with your book production. Don't put a bunch of bells and whistles into something that you've never done before. Do something standard and good, but do it really well. That's the kicker.
Yeah. Well, just like Dave and I, when we started this podcast, when we did episode 1, we kept it simple. And it wasn't until much later on that we felt better about what we were doing that we were able to say stuff like this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And we respectfully added this in. Your hosts have been Brad Guigar. Do you remember this part? The editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, my friend, and co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com. And check out his Kickstarter, anatomykickstarter.com.
And then, as we got better with the podcast, we added in the ComicLab theme song, which was used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And then, Brad, in all seriousness, we really did kick up the podcast a notch by having this episode and all episodes edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media. And then we brought it into even higher heights with the sponsorship of Wacom over at wacom.com. Wacom, the maker of fine Cintiqs and Intuos, which both Brad and I use and love, so check them out.
And really, I think we hit our peak when we came to this and said that Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So we're going to go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Comic Lab. Try that again, because my little spit screen is losing some of its tension, so it's dropping every now and again, and so
Brad, that happens to all older men. Don't worry about it. Men of a certain age, Brad. All right, here we go.
Tell me about it.
You're losing a little tension in your spit guard. I see. Say no more. All right. I don't know what that got me.